I have some points I'd like to probe in this group. I'd especially like to welcome Amendment 95, ascertaining and learning from patients' experiences of hospital treatment. And as the Noble Earl Howe made very powerful and moving points, I think we could really take those on board. But I've got some reservations. We live in a time of a complaints culture, and my concern is that this important notion of learning from patients' experiences doesn't become a way of stigmatising hospital staff and psychiatrists and people queuing up to point the finger. And there are many people I know who've had experiences of hospital who will, at a particular time, tell you it was a terrible experience, and then at another time acknowledge it saved their life, because it depends on what phase they are in relation to their illness in some ways, their perspective. So I both welcome it and challenge it. I'm very keen that treatments are taken seriously, whether administered in hospital or the community, as we all are. And as the Noble Lord Crisp and Baroness Hollins notes in Amendment 148, which I think is a very important amendment, the most important amendment in this group for me, we need to be alert to when, for example, the use of psychiatric medication as a treatment creates a problem of dependency. We all know that this is growing as a problem, and I think we've got to consider that. Perhaps the tenor of Baroness Tyler and Bennett's Amendments 50 and 51, and an emphasis on non-drug-based forms of medical treatment, I'm less convinced by the emphasis here. And I'm worried about simply giving a wholly positive view of psychological and therapeutic treatments, because I think it perhaps misses some of the changes in today's culture that leads to the overprescription of, for example, antidepressants. When I was working in the area of community mental health many moons ago, the fashion amongst progressives in the therapeutic community was often anti-psychiatry, anti-hospital, and most definitely anti-pharmacological interventions, with a huge amount of hostility to the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't always go along with that, but that was the kind of mood. Peculiarly, I'd argue that today it is therapeutic experts, counsellors and psychological practitioners who, by becoming diagnostically trigger-happy in labelling people as ill, are creating a huge demand for both third-party interventions, which I've just discussed already in previous speeches, but also a demand for treatment. And that often leads to a clamouring, especially amongst younger people, for pills to help them to cope with the travails of life. And this is being egged on in some ways by therapeutic practitioners. I was particularly drawn attention to this when something I organised at the Academy of Ideas. We had a debate on young people and mental health and these kind of issues. And the audience was largely young people who said that the problem was that psychiatrists and GPs and doctors wouldn't listen to them and wouldn't believe them that they were mentally ill, and they demanded treatment, and they were quite aggressive. It was kind of one of those, young people saying, "Where are my tablets?" And I thought, life's changed slightly. And it was the psychiatrists in the room were trying to hold the line and gently suggest that maybe they weren't ill. And that led to even more kind of hysterical reaction. "How dare you say I'm not ill?" And then they went on to explain how they'd had a chat with their school counsellor and they were sure they were ill and they wanted the tablets. If we can take a popular example that I appreciate might get me into the heart of an argument I don't want to be in terms of the slippage between autism and mental illness. But anyway, I'm going to talk about ADHD. ADHD is the fashionable disorder of the day, and there are huge numbers of students and school pupils demanding that their neurodevelopmental disorder is recognised and catered for. In my view, it's often diagnosed promiscuously, and it's leading to huge demands that I think are actually detrimental to education, by the way. It's likely to make councils go bankrupt and schools collapse, but that's a different debate, different bill. But also is leading, again, as I say, for demands for tablets. And I do go along with those who were warning about overdiagnosis. The Times reports that 278,000 people in England are on central nervous system stimulants to treat ADHD, and there's been an 18% hike in prescriptions for ADHD drugs between April 2023 and March 2024. And in the US, the figures are startling, and we should be wary of them, with 7 million American children who are said to have ADHD. And as the New York Times has said, there's a danger that, quote, we are using stimulants to suppress all spontaneous behaviour in normal children by pumping them with Ritalin and other calming drugs and sedating normal children. And I think, in a broad sense, that's a worry. And talking about treatments, it's, I think that Noble Lord Chris made this point, it's also creating a social problem of people feeling if they're ill, they can't go to work, of over-giving them drugs, and all sorts of problems that are going along with this. But also, isn't it tragic that so many people want their children or themselves to have these drugs in order to feel that they can cope, when they're actually really not that ill, or not ill at all, but they've got the label. So I'm very wary of inappropriate treatments, but perhaps the problem needs to be looked at differently, as stemming from an inflated and expansive diagnostic criteria often deployed from within the therapeutic community, actually, rather than psychiatry. And finally, we should not be naive that non-drug-based therapeutic interventions are virtuous per se. As counselling, for example, has extended its reach into British society so much that it's now a rare family who has no experience of the phenomena, I'm sure that we will all know that going to a therapist or a counsellor is, to say the least, a mixed bag. And actually, ironically, they end up saying that what you need to do is to have third-party intervention and medical intervention, and it's actually bad for the nation's health.